Good morning, everybody. This is Peter, and happy Labor Day to everybody. Today, I want to talk about how do we not lose money while investing in real estate. And the best way to talk about it, in my opinion, is to look at the example of how you could very easily lose a lot of money with what's supposed to be an actually good investment. How did this whole topic came about? As I said last week, I had something else planned in mind, and then on Monday or Tuesday, somebody sent me a portfolio. They said, "Hey, take a look at it. Really motivated seller. They would like to sell it. Tell me what you can do." And so, of course, I went in and I did a bunch of math on it. And I'm kind of curious, and as I was looking at the portfolio, I realized that portfolio was an extremely good example of how a good investment can go pretty bad, mostly through mismanagement and through some maybe poor decisions at some point. So let's talk about it a little bit. Let me bring up the slides that I put together. So let's talk about what is the deal that I'm talking about. So the deal came across my desk, and they are asking $14 million. There are 26 units, 25 houses, and one duplex. As it turned out, 14 of those are vacant as of right now. And that was immediate warning bell for me. I don't particularly like buying vacant properties, and I've talked about why before, and we're going to talk about more why that's the case. There was another interesting complication on that one. There was a loan on that property which had to be assigned to the new owner, and the reason it had to be assigned to the new owner was because it had a very unfavorable prepayment terms. It's called yield maintenance, and I'll talk a little bit more about what it is. But it would mean that in order to prepay that loan, it could cost several $100,000. Now, the loan for $35,000, that loan could be assigned to a new owner if the new owner qualified. I happen to have a relationship with the lender, so it's not a big concern to me. I can qualify, I'm sure. I know what they need, and I know how to get it done. Furthermore, according to the estimation of my broker, $300,000 would be an estimated amount of money needed to repair all of the vacant units. And we don't know why the units went vacant, but our suspicion is that they needed repairs in order to put a tenant in it, and the owner was cash poor, didn't have the cash to do the repairs, and he chose not to do that. So now we're looking at $300,000 in additional investment that's needed. I'm listing a lots known NOI here, and why am I bringing that up is I'm trying to estimate how much that portfolio is going to make when all of the units are rented, and the best number I can go by to is the NOI that was when they were all rented, which was actually a year ago. And so I try to stay away from market rents and estimated rents because those tend to be pretty subjective. And depending on which side of this equation are you in, if you're selling, you're going to think they're high. If you're buying, you're going to think they're low. So I usually try and focus on what is real, and then based on that we'll work. So based on that, the cap rate is 9.5. It's this portfolio in one of the markets where I would expect to see a higher cap rate in that particular market, and I'm not going to name the city. I would expect to be in double digits. But on the surface, it doesn't look bad. I mean, it's 9.5. Come in, negotiate a little bit, maybe get something better. Now, let's take a look at it in a little more detail. But before we go that, I want us all to level set on the difference between a vacant unit and a leased unit from the perspective of an investor. Now, again, before we go further, I'm going to say I'm looking at it as a portfolio investment because that's what I do. This would also apply to an apartment building. the math is going to be slightly different as to how you get to the final numbers, but the logic is going to be the same. Now, in case of a single house is either rented or it's not, and so when it's not rented, it's very obvious that you're losing a bunch of money and you have to get it rented right away. In this particular case, it's not obvious right away, or at least it's not obvious how expensive it is not having those units not rented. So let's jump into the discussion of leased unit versus vacant unit. So when the unit is leased, there are certain, of course, it's generating revenue if it's leased and if the tenant is paying. And there are certain expenses that go against that unit. And those expenses are vacancy, which is an accumulation budget between 5 and 10%, property taxes, depending on what the county for that particular market is doing, insurance, management, which is usually management fee is usually a percentage of the gross rents. So if no gross rents, no management fee. Repair and maintenance, which happens when tenants use the property and things go wrong. And then you also have the bills that, while they're being generated, are supposed to be paid by the tenants, and that's your water, sewer, garbage, utilities paid by the tenant, and usually landscaping or snow removal or whatever is appropriate for that area. In Seattle, we wouldn't expect any snow removal, but there's still heating bills that need to be paid and all that stuff. When that same unit goes vacant, on the other hand, the math changes. So we're no longer going to hit it with vacancy because, well, it's vacant. It's 100% vacant. You still have to pay property taxes on it, whether you have somebody living in there or not. When it's vacant for a month or two, it's not a huge deal. It's 1/12 of a year worth of annual taxes. But let's leave that property vacant for a year, and all of a sudden, your property tax bill is going to add up. And then you have your insurance. Hopefully, you're not canceling your insurance when the property is vacant. And nothing else, I would actually try and boost it, because chances of something going seriously wrong are actually higher. Squatters could come in and cause a fire, a pipe could burst and nobody would notice that for 2 weeks. Normally small things could result in much higher damage. That's why I do recommend insuring your vacant units, and most insurance companies will actually want to, they have a clause that says the unit has to be rented. Now, the good news is you're not going to pay any management fee because you're not collecting any rents. There's going to be some minimum repair and maintenance. Again, something goes wrong, somebody has to go and then check. Now, what is going to change is now water, sewer, and garbage is going to be paid by the owner, by you. So with the utilities, you still need to heat and cool the building or take care of it, because unless you're going to go and winterize it, you don't want to turn off the heat. And even if you do winterize it, especially in a humid climate like Seattle, things will, over time, will get worse. You'll get high humidity, mold growth, and things like that. And then landscaping or snow removal, whatever is needed. So that is the main difference. And when we look at the math on the next slide, I want you to keep that in mind, because I'm hitting some numbers. Lease units get hit with some costs, and then vacant units get hit with other costs. So let's take a look at it. Right now, that portfolio has 14 vacant units, so only 12 units are rented. So instead of collecting $270,000 in gross rent, the owner of that portfolio is only collecting $123,000 in gross rents. His NOI is going to be $57,000 a year, according to my estimation, and that is that's only 46% of the gross rents. Now, normally we would expect to see to expect the NOI to be 60% of the gross rents, but because of all those additional expenses, in particularly water, sewer, garbage, utilities, landscaping, property tax, and insurance on vacant units that are not offset by revenue, it actually drives your number down. I'm also applying to the $300 a month for maintenance and utilities is kind of just a number I'm hitting all of the units with, because That's for the bills, the utilities, the minimum maintenance, sometimes property management. If the property is vacant for a long time, the property management would come in and they'll expect some kind of a minimum for going in there once a month and making sure that it's still there. So that's the vacancy piece. Now let's talk about the debt. So there is that loan, and I actually had the copy of the loan documents, and the loan was signed last year, middle of 2018. And a lot of the information I got on that portfolio came from that loan, including rent rolls for when the loan was originated. So estimated debt servicing on that loan is about $126,000 a year, and that assumes a 30-year principal amortization. Now, if you do the math and you subtract $126,000, but that's your mortgage a year, from $57,000, your net operating income a year, you're going to end up with a $69,000 shortfall, or you're going to end up with a almost $6,000 check that the owner has to write for his properties instead of making money. Now that is bad. Instead of a 9% cap right now, it's a negative whatever, negative 60,000 on we don't know how much you want to put in it. So bad, but maybe not so bad just yet. But let's keep looking at it. When we would try to guess why the owner let so many units go vacant, and to give you a better idea, here's how bad that was. Last year, middle of last year in 2018, when they originated the loan, according to the loan documents, and the banks are actually pretty good about reading the leases and making sure that the tenants are there and asking for evidence of payment and things like that, only 2 units were vacant. Since then, all the units where the tenant moved out stayed vacant. The owner did not put new tenants in it. We suspect it was because the owner used up all of his resources to do that refi or to purchase that portfolio, and they didn't have any cash to actually turn the units. By turn the units, I mean go in there, clean, fix whatever needs to be fixed. Usually on a unit that's well maintained, I would expect the turning cost not to exceed $2,000. On this one, however, because now we think it's about between $15,000 and $20,000 to turn each unit, that they weren't properly maintained, or the owner wanted to upgrade them. I don't know what the deal was, but for some reason he decided that, what I think, at that point he didn't have enough cash to spend on turning the unit, so he said, okay, I'm going to leave this one vacant. It's an easy decision to make, and why? I know that because been there, done that. Early in our career, we bought a 14-unit apartment building, really bad tenants, stuff. I mean, it was a lot of work. We had to spend a lot of money on turning the units, and at some point I had 3 or 4 units that went vacant almost within a month of each other. And we were also doing a new construction build in downtown Seattle, and we were doing a flip in Bellevue. And the cash was super tight, and I said, okay, let's just let those units sit. Fortunately for us, when we finished the new construction and we finished the flip, we got a bunch of cash, and we were able to use that cash to turn those units. And only later I realized how expensive it was not to have those units rented. Well, in this particular case, what I think happened is the owner made that decision on the first unit, then the second unit rolled around. He made the decision not to turn it on the second unit, while because here's what I think he was hoping for. He was hoping for, okay, the unit went vacant right now. I still haven't made enough cash from this portfolio to turn it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait a few months, and then once I collect a little bit of cash revenue from the portfolio, I'll use that cash to turn the unit. Well, when you have 26 houses, and let's say your lease expiration dates are evenly distributed throughout the year, you're gonna have 2 and a little bit of a lease expiring per month. So either he did get lucky, or he got unlucky, or the tenants weren't greatest, or the units weren't the greatest. But instead of collecting more cash on a month 2, another unit vacated, and then Of course, he's getting less cash every month, so it would take longer for him to collect enough money to actually repair the first 2 units, well, then third unit goes vacant, and so on. And so he ended up with 14 units that are not producing revenue, only producing expenses. And now, for somebody who's cash poor, he also needs to write a $6,000 check every month. A really hard situation for that particular owner to be in. Let's move on. So he put that portfolio up for sale. He wants to sell it. Well, we need $300,000 to fix up the units. There is also an assignment fee. $35,000 needs to be paid. There is also, it's going to take 6 months to turn 14 units at least. And if you're holding them at $6,000 a month, that's 6 times 6, 30, another $36,000. So I've estimated that the total capital needed to hold that portfolio for 6 months and get it back to cash flow again would be about $400,000. So now it's all of a sudden it became a value add just because of how many vacancies he has. So now we need to pay his asking price and invest another $400,000 into it. Well, with all that, after the 6 months, you could get to an effective cap rate of about 9%. What makes it didn't work for me is that because you're also stuck with a very expensive loan that you have to take over, your cash on cash return would only be about 5.3%. And because you turned your units, you've already used up a lot of the upside, and anything goes wrong comes out of that. So for that market, that is not enough for me to even get interested about, because the asking price for that property was $1.4 million. He has a $1.1 million loan. So I said, well, what if I were to just take the portfolio away from him? Let me rephrase that. What if he decided he just wanted to hand the keys to someone, walk away, and don't pay off and transfer the mortgage, and he doesn't get anything? Well, even then, with assignment fees, and somebody has to pay closing fees and closing costs and commissions, he would the cash on cash return for potential investment would be about 9%. Again, for that market, not exciting. So I think that portfolio is going to be really hard to sell, and we'll talk about it more at the end. Now, what is the really scary part of this whole situation? So it only took him, he took over this portfolio in 2018. It had 7% vacancy, which is normal, which is why bank financed it. And he was cash flowing $26K positive a year. I suspect if he would have gotten at least 3 or 4 months with no vacancies of that money, he would have probably had enough cash to start turning units one at a time. Because he was very undercapitalized in the beginning and he didn't start turning units right away, whenever the vacancies happened, they quickly reduced that $26K positive cash flow down to nothing and then pushed it into the negative. The loan that he has is called yield maintenance loan, and it's a 10-year loan that originated in 2018. Usually those loans, what yield maintenance means is that if you want to prepay that loan, it's going to cost you a lot of money, and here's why. Most of the companies that finance those portfolio loans, or a lot of them, what they do is they'll take that loan and they will securitize it, and then they would sell it to a securities investor, almost like a bond, if you would. And that security investor, and it actually is sold as a bond type of instrument, buys it for the 10-year cash flow. Well, if you want to prepay that, you have to get that person, that investor, the difference between risk-free interest rate or 3-month T-bill and the interest rate on the loan for the duration of the loan life, for the 10 years. So in other words, you're paying net present value of the interest that you would have paid for the entire life of the loan. Of course, when you have majority of that life left, it's really expensive. And I haven't done the math on exactly what the prepayment would be, but multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars. So owner did not turn the units as they went vacant. So now he's stuck with a loan that he cannot refinance or prepay. He is now in the negative, and now what happens? So the 14 units already vacant. He's bleeding 69,000 a year, and then what happens when another unit goes vacant, and another unit goes vacant, and he doesn't have money to turn them? That person is going to end up either in a bankruptcy or losing the loan. Now, to make things even worse, I have a couple of similar loans on some of my portfolios, and most of them stipulate that to stay current, you have to maintain a certain occupancy rate, and it's usually around 90%. In other words, the loan documents say you have to be 90% occupied. If you're not, you're basically defaulted on the loan, and the bank can take over. I suspect the bank doesn't know that there is a 14% vacancy or 14 unit vacancy on that portfolio. But if you were to talk to them and they would find out, they could potentially jump in and take over the loan. So, bad situation all around. Now, what to do next for that person? And when my broker sent me this loan, I looked at it, I did all the math, I sent it back. I said, hey, listen, I'm not interested in buying that portfolio. As a matter of fact, I'm not interested in even getting it for free, because all I would do is I would put myself in the current owner's shoes. In other words, I would have to go into the portfolio, then I would have to raise $400,000 that I currently don't have sitting in my bank, doing nothing. And then once I raise that, I will have to go ahead and turn the units, while possibly other units vacating and going empty and adding to the cost. I said, I don't need to put myself in those shoes. The return would be minimal, and the risk is big. So what are some of the options? And I brainstormed with a couple of friends, and yeah, if he were able to find somebody to buy that portfolio for him, that would be amazing. I wouldn't hold my breath on that. If the owner just walked away from the portfolio, assigned the loan to somebody else, and signed over the deed, the buyer would be getting a cash of about 8%, which I also find unlikely to happen for a portfolio that needs value add and things. There are easier ways to make money out there. There are easier portfolios. And then the buyer would still be stuck with the loan. Then, of course, current owner just hand the bank the keys, walk away. There is cost associated with it. I wouldn't be surprised if the loan had some kind of personal guarantee on it. Knowing the lender, I don't think they would do a non-recourse loan on something like this. So there is cost associated with that. We thought, me and a really good commercial broker, a friend of mine, when we talked about it, he thought that negotiating with a lender might be the owner's best option. And why? Because, well, obviously the portfolio is in bad enough shape to where the bank won't want it, and they'll have the same problem selling it to somebody. So the bank, and I'm using the term bank, but it's actually not. It's a commercial lending institution, it's not truly a bank. But the lender would have to take over that portfolio and manage that portfolio. Now, granted, their contract and their language has all the necessary structure in it to where they could take over the portfolio, take over management, and start cash flowing. Well, they would still have to put in the $400,000 or $300,000 to get the portfolio back up to positive cash flow. So they really wouldn't want to do it. So the current owner might have a leverage over the bank in that sense, and he could go and talk to them and try and renegotiate, maybe get some more money out of them, maybe get them to pause on interest payments for 6 months to give him a chance to, start maybe returning some of the units and recovering them with active cash flows. I mean, he could talk to the bank. Now, the danger of doing that is that when he's gonna go to talk to the bank, he's gonna have to tell them that, oh, by the way, that loan that you guys gave me on all of those all of those rental properties, well, 14 of them aren't rented, and that's actually would constitute a default, and the bank could foreclose at that point. So hopefully this is a good example of what not to do. Want to reemphasize, if you choose to invest in rental properties, especially in a multifamily on a portfolio loan, make sure that you do not let your units become vacant, because whether they're vacant or not, they're going to generate cost, and if they're not generating revenue, they're costing you money. It is very similar to a production situation. In a production situation, if you have machines that are supposed to be producing stuff that are costing, and you have 20 machines and 20 machines are running, you're taking all of your overhead and you're spreading it over those 20 machines of the revenue, and each one is making a little bit of money. As you start shutting down those machines for whatever reason, because you don't have enough sales or so on, then you can spread your overhead over a smaller base, and now all of a sudden the per unit cost starts to go up. And once that per unit cost exceeds your per unit revenue, you're in negative. Same thing happens with rental homes. You have your per unit cost that is a mixture of fixed cost and variable costs, and mortgage would be a fixed cost. And then as you take houses or units offline, you are spreading the cost over a smaller base, and so per unit cost starts to increase, and at some point it's going to exceed your rent. Don't do it. Whether you invest yourself, whether you're using an operator, whether you're using property management or not, always be on top of your vacancies. If you have one unit that you don't have money to remodel to put a tenant in, find the money while it's still one unit, because when it becomes 2 units, you're going to need twice as much money, and it's going to be twice as hard to find money. And when it's 14 units, like in case of this guy, I don't know if anybody would lend that guy money if they knew the situation. So short of he basically needs a bailout, and I don't know if anyone is going to produce it. What else is important to note? Property management. If you're using third-party property management company, don't expect them to chase you around and to ask you, hey, so are you ready to remodel this unit yet? We really want to put it back on the market. They're not going to do that. Not their job, not something that I've seen most of the companies interested in doing. They're going to call you up and they're going to say, hey, the tenant gave notice. He's going to move out on such and such. What do you want us to do? You're going to say, I want you to put another tenant in there. And they'll go in and they'll do a pre-move out inspection. They're going to be like, oh, it's going to cost you $8,000 to do it. And at that point you can say, yep, here's the check, or take it out of the proceeds if you have enough proceeds from other properties, or you could say, no, don't do it, and they'll be okay with it. And then again, you might end up in a situation where $8,000 becomes $16,000, becomes $24,000, and all of that time your proceeds from the rest of your portfolio is coming down and down and down. Hopefully that was educational, or at least entertaining. If you have any questions on anything I talked about, please let me know. I'm gonna switch to my full face. Again, you can find my information at on Facebook. There is a Choice for Homes Investment Solution Facebook page where I'm gonna save a copy of this video. There is also gonna be a copy of this video on our YouTube channel, and you can always reach me via email at peter@choiceforhomes.com or info@choiceforhomes.com. I'm looking at whether there are any questions. It doesn't appear to be so. I don't see any questions. So if you do come up with a question, send it to me. If you want to get together and learn more about real estate investing, please do so. I've also built a little tool that helps to estimate net operating income for single or multifamily property. If you want a copy of that, reach out to me and I'll just shoot it over. So anyway, see you all again next Monday, and I don't know what I'm going to talk about. Probably about the difference between cash on cash and return on investment and other things that people are using to evaluate their portfolios. So bye everybody.